All right. Well, now I would like to introduce you to another great and very active board director for the Future Space Leaders Foundation, Debra Facktor. Debra is the head of U.S. Space Systems at Airbus U.S. Space and Defense. Debra is going to be moderating another one of our camp fireside chats. If you remember, we're trying to warm up from all the great air conditioning, not because of the heat outside. So we're going to have a great conversation. This fireside chat is going to be talking about national security. We're very grateful and fortunate to have Major General Gregory Gagnon, Deputy Chief of Space Operations for Intelligence, joining us today. Thank you, sir, both for your service and for making the time to talk with our audience. We're very grateful. So now I'll turn it over to Debra Facktor. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and really excited to see another great turnout for our Future Space Leaders Forum. And I've been on the board, a lot of years, and this is always one of my favorite parts of the afternoon. It's just the opportunity to chat to a senior leader from the national security space area. This time we have Major General Gregory Gagnon, who is, I think we'll just call him like the top intel guy of the Space Force. And we're going to learn a little bit more today about what his role is, what is the role of intelligence in the Space Force, and also all the other interactions that he's having across the other agencies. So I trust that you can look up his bio on your own. I won't read it because we've got a short time. So we have a fireside chat, but it's really more like an air-conditioned walk. So does that sound good? So I'm going to first ask my first question, which is, so you started out in ROTC, and you do not have a technical background. I'm not judging that as an engineer myself, but it is a great question about getting involved in the aerospace and defense industry. How did you pick this industry, and especially the Air Force at the time, and tying that with the education that you chose?
Good afternoon. I think I turned that on. All right. Good afternoon. All right, I will answer that question. I won't sit down because unless you're in the first row, you won't see me because I only stretch out to 5'8", okay? And then at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it turns into 5'7", okay? So thanks for letting me come visit. In fact, I backed in to this career. Debra talked about ROTC. Who here knows what that stands for? Raise your hand. Okay. Reserve Officer Training Corps. So as you went through university, there were those folks in uniform that were rocking on campus, running in the morning and doing stuff like that. That was me 35 years ago. And when I did that, it was for the United States Air Force. And the reason I joined the United States Air Force is because I still wanted to be walking on campus. It was the only way I could afford to go to college. And I share this story with folks in the service my entire career because when you tell them that, they almost feel ashamed sharing that because you're supposed to from birth be the ultimate patriot. But that isn't always the case. I joined the military, raised my right hand because I had to pay for tuition, okay? And then you say, well, how did you back into your career field? This is how the story went. My senior military professor said, Greg, what do you want to do? You should fly a plane. I said, how long's the commitment? He said, 7 years. I said, no. Then he said, well, you're an exchange student, right? I was an exchange student in Japan during college, and I studied economics and kind of international finance. Sorry, it's not technical enough, Debra, but...
but there's math. There's math involved.
There is math. I used to tutor math, yeah. So I go, yeah, that's pretty cool. He says, why don't you be a finance officer? I said, okay, so I'll check that out. So during the summer, between junior, senior year, I leave Vermont, which, have any of you been to Vermont? All right, I'm gonna pick two people. Since you've been to Vermont, you get a Space Force pen, okay? And since you've been to Vermont, you're getting a Space Force pen, okay? All right, so there I am in Vermont. And if you can envision Vermont, what do you think it looks like? It's green, it's beautiful, right? So I have to go study finance, and they have me go to Altus, Oklahoma, right? So green is not a color at Altus, Oklahoma. So I went and shadowed that for a little bit, and I found that I didn't really enjoy that as much. So I came back to that same senior officer, and I said, I don't think that's what I want. He goes, well, you travel a lot. Why don't you become an intel officer? You can go anywhere in the world. I said, how long is the commitment? And what did he say? 4 years. I said, sold. That's what I'm going to do. So that's how this all starts, okay? And if you ever have the opportunity to sit in a pub with some military officers, ask them about how they make their choices. As we get older, they start to inculcate into us, the service before self, excellence in all we do, and other core values that the other services have. But when we first raise our right hand, a lot of us are doing that for two reasons. One, since we were a little itty bitty kid, we wanted to fly a jet. Or two, we had to pay for school, okay? Those are the two big things. So that's how I walked into the biggest aerospace company in the world, known as the United States Air Force. And one of the things I had to do was make sure that I continued to be a lifelong learner so that I could continue to learn about flying, and then later in life, cyberspace, and then later in life, outer space.
So the commitment was 4 years. You must have enjoyed it because you're still here. So maybe say a little bit about that journey. Was it what you expected or not? Because thinking about Intel and what that meant back then and what it means today. So maybe share a little bit about what you do today and how that looked back then, and making the decision from 4 to 14 to 24, to later.
Yep, that's a great question. So I will tell you, when I made that decision and raised my right hand, I was Greg Gagnon, party of one. Okay, it was just me. But the next time I'm asked to make that decision, it's Greg Gagnon and Johanna Gagnon, right? My spouse. So the decisions become different as you get older. The third time I raised that right hand, right, for another 4 years, it's Greg Gagnon, Johanna Gagnon, and 2 children, right? So the reason we can recruit people is different than the things we have to deliver to retain people, right? So you got to have quality of life. You got to have quality of work. You got to love what you're doing. That's what causes you to stay, when you love what you're doing. So I will tell you that after the first re-enlistment, right? 8 years, I raised my hand. Then I'm kind of in. 9/11 happens. That's an important part of our history. And then our nation's at war. And our nation remains at war for almost 2 decades, which is incredibly uncommon for our country. So I'm still backing into it.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm
So-
still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, by the way, so.
Okay, well, that was another question, but maybe we'll start with what are you doing with your life? Like, describe
Okay.
really, what is the role? What does an intel officer mean? What do you do? Cyberspace, probably
Yep.
that term wasn't even invented.
It wasn't.
Back then. So what do
Okay.
tell us about what you do, your day
Okay.
job.
So, what do you think an intelligence officer does? Ray, give me an answer.
Figures out what adversaries know.
Yep, figures out, that's a good answer. Here you go, get a pen. That's pretty good. You want to figure out the capabilities of your adversaries, and you want to discern what their intent is, because capability plus intent equals a threat. And your job is to understand the threat. And your job as an intelligence officer, regardless of the level of government you work at, is to learn about your enemies and your adversaries so that you can explain to people about the threat. Sometimes when you start your career, you're teaching a pilot about the threat of a foreign air force or a foreign air defense system. Sometimes you're teaching them about the threat from terrorist organizations. As you get older, you start to talk to people who no longer kind of drive or fly those weapon systems. You start talking to people who make political decisions or military strategy decisions. So your job is to understand the capabilities and intent of foreign militaries so that you can tell them what Mr. Putin wants to do with his military forces and what President Xi wants to do with his military forces. Not only what they want to do, but what do they have the capability to do that matches up with that intent. Because then we plan our counter strategy. And that's what an intelligence officer does. An intelligence officer takes intelligence and turns it into analysis. The other thing that intelligence officers do is they go and get that information. If the information was readily available, it wouldn't really need to have spies collect it, right? So there's multiple ways that you can do that. Some ways are as old as the nation, right? We have humans who go and, I buy a couple beers and we talk about it and then I write a report, right? That's called human intelligence, right? Another way we do it is we take pictures, right? And where do you have the best vantage point to take pictures from? Usually from above, because if you're on the ground, you can't see the people in the back, right? Because the front row clouds them. So you do it from above, which is why aerial reconnaissance was so important and why space reconnaissance is so important, right? The other thing you can do is you can collect their electronic signals, right? We call that signals intelligence, right? And guess what? Unlike your grandparents, you guys have a much larger electronic signature, right? You don't do anything without that, okay? And then there's one other major kind of technical thing called measurements and signature analysis. It's super nerdy stuff, but like if your refrigerator hums, that puts out some either electromagnetic or RF energy. Just kind of understanding that because you can learn stuff from that. And then finally, open source intel. So as an intel officer, you collect information from all those different disciplines, you analyze the information, and then you tell people what you know.
So can I come to one of the points you made about making your own decisions of when it was you, it was your spouse, you have family, and now you've got guardians, you've got a lot of different stakeholders. So talk a little bit about how you make decisions later in your career with the kind of things that you gather in intel, because there's the information, there's the analysis, and then what you do with it, and then how you decide what to do with it. Can you talk a little bit through how you make those decisions or advise others to make those decisions based on the analysis that you've done?
Okay. I read a lot. Do you know why I read a lot? Because reading's how I learn. As you get older, you guys have just finished school and you basically, try to survive that, right? But as you get older, it's important to understand how you learn. Are you a learner who learns by doing, a learner who learns by seeing, a learner who learns by listening or reading? And then making sure that you play to your strength, because you have to be a lifelong learner to be successful. But recognize that nobody's great at all those different modalities of learning. When I was mid-20s, I was a teacher in the military. I had to teach, and that's where I learned how to teach adult learners. That's where I learned how to watch somebody and say, oh, that person's a visual learner. Oh, that person likes to just have a discussion. That's how they learn. They never read that paper I send them, right? And then I've actually used that as a hack in my career to give information and expand my influence with my boss. How does my boss learn? Because my job is to teach them what I know about the enemy. If I keep writing these great papers, but that guy doesn't read papers, he wants to chat about it, I'm not being successful, I'm wasting my time, and I'm wasting my people's time. So one of the things I always do is assess my boss. So I'm on my 7th in a row 4-star boss, okay? So I basically figure out how they learn, and they're all very, very different, okay? Very, very different. And then I morph how I deliver and communicate through that type of process. I'll give you, you guys won't know who this is. His name's General Hyten. He used to be the vice chairman, okay? The vice chairman. I used to be like his special staff officer for a little bit. He learns by reading. There's another guy who started my service. His name is General Raymond, okay? He used to be my boss too. He learns by talking, right? And I figured that out so that I could be influential in the information that I was delivering.
So I'm really smiling because my team's over here, and I'm sure they're already thinking like, oh, we know how she learns. So I'm curious. Now I'm gonna get a bunch of feedback. I'm excited about that. So thinking about how people learn is also finding common languages. And I was teasing a little bit about engineering or not, because there are two questions. One is, there is a perception, I get a question from students a lot, especially younger, high school, maybe middle school, who say, well, do I have to be an engineer in order to be in the space industry? And I always say no, because it takes a community, and there's so many different skills and things to bring in. So, and also math, science, music are common languages that can or art, bring people together. So can you give an example maybe of using that ability to learn and communicate using different languages?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, one that you could share with us. How
Well,
about
I'm
that?
going to give you like 3 things.
Okay.
One is when you have to solve a problem and you need to build a team of 7, right? Don't put 7 of the same thing in the room, because you'll only get high confidence in this single one answer, right? You actually need to have cross-functional teams with different experiences so that when the solution is decided upon by the team and they bring it to you, you know that they didn't get groupthink and get too narrow. And things that make people think alike are academic disciplines, particular schools that teach certain ways. So you want to vary that a little bit. That has helped me out immensely.
Yeah.
The second thing I'll tell you, and I'm not saying this as the liberal arts person in the room, but those who know why will always lead those who know how. When you move up, I'm not balancing equations. I'm connecting your everyday work with larger objectives. And I'm helping motivate you that you know that what you're doing is important. And I also am learning the people skills to tell you that's really important, but that's not where we're headed. So that's valuable, but let's make sure we're moving towards, the strategic objectives of the organization. So that's the second thing.
Yeah.
And because I'm old, I forgot what my third one was.
Oh,
so.
it's all right. We'll move on. So great examples of diversity in people and thinking and bringing together teams. So how about from an industry standpoint? There's also a big diversity in capabilities, increased investment in commercial, increased roles of international collaboration, and with the Space Force standing up as a new organization. So how do you see some of new players coming in and helping with the mission versus doing it, one service doing it all themselves or one organization? So maybe talk a little bit about that mix. There's a lot of the interns are spending time this summer in commercial environments. So would appreciate your perspective on that.
So I will tell you our strength in space and where we have an overwhelming lead is in commercial space. It is by far probably one of the biggest gaps between a U.S. industry and a foreign industry. A lot of countries can make steel. A lot of countries can actually make microchips. How many countries can launch every week? How many countries can drop regularly with high reliability 56 to 66 satellites out on one launch? Okay? We have a tremendous advantage in our space industry, but a lot of our tremendous advantage is in one little part of our space industry. We need it to be broader. I will also show one of my biases. Greater competition drives lower prices and higher levels of innovation than monopolistic or duopolies, okay? And launch is a great example of that over the last 30 years. If you guys study launch from like 1990 to today, you find that when there's competition, price becomes more, there's a better return on investment on the price point, and you also see greater and greater innovation. That special sauce right there, which we call the private market economy, is our special sauce. Yeah. So the private sector is incredibly important, okay? I will tell you, for an industrial-based question, one of my concerns is that we have an adversary that's moving very fast as well. And if you think about what the United States has put in outer space for numbers of satellites, I would tell you that 80% of it is communication satellites, okay? 80%, right? And the goal of a number of constellations is to give low-cost internet access and voice to your phone anywhere from a satellite to a phone, right? That's like the, whoa, right? We're going to make some money doing that, right? Now, our foreign adversary, right, China, has put lower numbers of satellites up the last couple of years because they can't compete with our commercial sector. But over half of the satellites they've put in outer space are designed for intelligence and remote sensing. So the United States economy, left to its own devices, is trying to connect the world because the United States believes in freedom to information, right? Freedom to assemble, freedom to access information, freedom of speech, right? So it's just kind of an outgrowth of our economy. Our largest competitor is moving to use outer space for remote sensing so that they can see the world and spy on the world. And those are two major competing macro ideas that most of the United States doesn't think about too much. The people who run China, which is over 1 billion people, it's 1.4 billion people, is the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has 95 million people in it. Those 95 million run the 1.4 billion. Those 95 million in that Communist Party have their own military. It's called the People's Liberation Army. It is an army of the political party, not the army of the state. Most people don't know that either. It's an autocratic society. There are not freedoms. You couldn't move from your hometown to the city without a permit to do so. You don't have freedom to assemble. You don't have freedom of speech. So people always says, why are we so concerned? We're not concerned about the Chinese people. We're concerned about the CCP.
And on that note, I think it's time for another question.
All right. Quick
But not
hand.
from me, from the audience.
Oh, yeah, from
How
them.
about that? Yes. We do have a mic wandering around, or you can stand up and use your outside voice.
Here's the rules. First name, where you're from.
Go ahead.
Oh,
My name's Annalise. I'm from Ohio. I'm at Ohio State. And because I'm from Ohio, I'm very familiar with the National Space Intelligence Center.
Yes.
How would you say that the NSIC fits into the intelligence community as a whole? Is the Air Force continuing to also do space-related intelligence, as well as the many other intelligence community members utilizing and being a part of space?
Great question. All right. Yeah. How does the National Space Intelligence Center, which is a Space Force intel organization, fit into the greater intelligence community? And how does it differentiate its role from other service centers? Okay? So, all right, how many elements in the intelligence community? Raise your hand. Who wants to answer that? You asked a question, you can't answer it. How many elements or agencies in the intelligence community of your government? Now I'm going to do something that isn't going to make sense to them. Do, 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 do. Oh, you do get it. All right, it's Jeopardy. All right. Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Nobody got that one, right? That's an old one. Sir, 18 is correct. Hands up for a second. No phone. All right, good job. Good job. Here comes a pen. I'm throwing it. You got to catch it. All right, 18. Of those 18, it is led by the Director of National Intelligence. She's currently a cabinet member. Her name is Avril Haines, okay? She's the boss of that. Inside those 18, 9 of those organizations are in the Department of Defense. Inside the Department of Defense, each of the services, the Space Force, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, we all have intelligence arms, and we're counted as one of those 18. And those 18 agencies in the intelligence community do those things we talked about at the beginning, right? We all do those things, okay, with different people who have different skills. And if somebody wants to know about a foreign satellite, who do you think they ask? And because I'm a little old and I don't have a lot of engineering skill, I call my organization in Ohio that has engineers, computer scientists, intel analysts, because remember we talked about building cross-functional teams? And those cross-functional teams say, this is what I think about that Chinese satellite. This is what I think about that Russian satellite. And then often, sometimes as often as every 2 weeks, they come over here and we go over to the big building right there and we go tell people things about those satellites, because that's our role. Now, let's say somebody said, tell me about that Russian tank. All right, if they ask about a Russian tank, they're going to ask the Army, right? And the Army's going to go to their intel center, and those folks are going to come in. And then if they're going to ask us a big question about what's Putin thinking, right? Then we have organizations that do that, like the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Department of Defense, and then the CIA. And the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is on the other side of the river, and the CIA, which is on the other side of the other river, right? Those two do all source. So they take the intel collected from everybody, right, those other elements of the IC, put it all together into an all-source report. So there are some parts of space that other agencies do, but all of that is coalescing into the National Space Intelligence Center, which is hiring, by the way, okay? We have some openings, and it's in Dayton, Ohio, which is a direct flight from here. Did I mention that? Did I mention that housing costs are much lower? Okay? Thank you for that question.
That was a great one.
USA Jobs. Repeat after me. USA Jobs. Thank you.
So first, thank you very much for your service. Deeply appreciate that. My name is Quinn McKimmey. I hail from Fort Mill, South Carolina, but currently support Astroscale US as a proposal manager in Denver, Colorado. My question is mainly around, you brought up China, and obviously there's increase in adversarial and even otherwise activity in space. You know, been tracking Space Force language for a while in terms of, you know, maneuver without regret, moving into sustained maneuver. As the domain continues to become more congested and contested, how does Space Force view itself managing its assets?
Okay. Astroscale. Astroscale is a company that has a U.S. subsidiary that's also a Japanese and U.K. company, and that's how that started. It's a company that is designed to do orbital on-servicing. So let me talk to you about that.
Can I
So-
give him a pen?
Can you give him, yeah, you can give
Some
him.
more pens over
Well,
there.
he's a contractor, I think, all right, you're good. So let's pretend Debra's a satellite and I'm a satellite. His company is saying, okay, Debra broke her foot, okay? Debra broke her foot. We can go over and fix her foot with our satellite and help fix that, and then all the investment you've made into Debra, you can then save because we can keep her working. And that's the premise of their company. That's a real sort of market opportunity, not just for the United States, but globally, right? Because if you can fix satellites that sometimes cost $1 billion, that's good, especially if there's just a small thing broken on them. The other thing that's of interest to people is if you could give it more energy, right? And we kind of say gas, but it's not gas, okay? If you can give it more energy to keep the satellite moving longer and being more effective. Those are also being looked at for, you know, return on a value from a military perspective, okay? This is not a uniquely American, Japanese, or UK idea. We see our adversaries thinking about this as well, because that's sort of the next generation of space. So a couple things on space. All right, so 2011. All right. What grade were you in 2011? Yeah, so second grade? Yeah, how big was grammar school? Like how many people in your grammar school? 300? Okay, so for every student in his school when he was 6, there were 3 satellites. So it was only like 1,000 satellites, okay? Today, it's 10,000, right? It's not quite Ohio State, right? Like, how many people at Ohio State? 35,000? Whoa. All right. That's SpaceX numbers right there, okay? So that's huge. So now there's about 10 times as many satellites that are operating in space. So there's a lot more going on. And when satellites break or break up, they create a lot of debris. And the problem about that is it's not litter like you're walking on the beach and you can pick up the litter. Litter's moving, right? Because things in space are moving. And if it hits your satellite, it breaks your satellite and it causes more litter. So we're kind of concerned about that. So that's why we talk about responsible activities in space and why our government is trying to promote social, basically business social norms in space that sustain outer space so that your grandkids can have a phone that immediately connects anywhere in the world through space. Okay?
How about one more question?
Oh, yeah.
One way in the back. Oh, you've got one. Go ahead. We'll give you two more.
Nope.
No.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your service. I'm Sophia. I'm a brookie this summer at the Aerospace Industries Association, and I'm from Brentwood, Tennessee. My question is regarding your bias against duopolies. The SDA has done an amazing job of producing rapid, short-term contracts and really delivering. How do you foresee that method of acquisition proliferating to the rest of the Space Force or not?
Can you tell them what SDA is
The Space Development Agency.
and who runs that? Derek
Space-
Tournier. Yep, Derek Tournier. I'm a huge fan. All right? He's crushing it, okay? He is basically going very fast, so fast walking, okay? He's launching contracts, and one of the key things he's doing is he's putting a whole bunch of satellites in space. He's going to probably put about 400 up in about 4 years, okay? But one of the key premises of his business case is, I'm not going to go with one supplier. I'm not. I'm going to tell them what the standards are, and those little satellites that are about this big are going to be made by 3 and 4 different companies. Because you know why? When one of them falls behind, I can cut them off, and I can go with the other 3. If I only go with one supplier and they get the whole order and they fall behind, then if I cut them off, I get nothing in return, right? I just lose all my investment. Competition leads to better outcomes. That's what Derek believes, that's what I believe, and that's what our bosses believe. So he's handling a certain class of program where he can do that. There are some rules on things that are really big about competitive bidding and stuff, but you are talking to an intel officer, and I'm not a contracting officer, so I won't go too far into that because I'll mess up what I'm saying.
And we're building some of those satellites
All right.
in my factory in Florida.
All right.
So, yeah,
Yeah, you're one of the 4.
we are, yeah,
It's a good question.
indeed. All right, another question.
Hi,
please.
I'll make it speedy. Thank you for your service and a great presentation. I'm Ariette. I'm a brookie and a SpaceX intern this summer. I'm from the Chicago suburbs. So my question is just for any young professionals who want to go into like human spaceflight or national security, or anything that has like real human lives at stake. I guess from your experience as an intel officer, like what's your advice for when you go home to your family and you need to separate all of that like stress from such a strenuous career? And you mentioned your wife and kids and how they're a big decision. Like,
Yeah.
where do you, when you go home, like, I guess, what's your process for separating all that work?
I'm not sure I have a great process. Okay? So I will tell you that's a very real thing with remote operations. So in my career, you know those remotely piloted aircraft, RPAs, we used to call them UAVs, but those things flying around the world. I did that for like 10 years, kind of the intel stuff with that. And you could have very surreal days. You could have days where you watched, unfortunately, you know, some violence, and then you literally went home and you lived in Hawaii. And it didn't make sense, but that's, that. Let me share with you, the world has bad people in it, okay? Look outside, turn around for a second. Our country's frickin' awesome, okay? Our country's frickin' awesome, but because it's awesome, sometimes people are mad at us, okay? And they want to do us harm. So we always need people who are going to raise their right hand and try to defend our country. And sometimes that comes with physical wounds, sometimes it comes with mental wounds and things like that. Just remember that. Here's the other thing. Not everyone should go in the military, okay? So don't let anyone guilt you if, you know, you're making other choices. I have 2 kids, one went in the military, one didn't, okay? No guilt. What America needs is for you to be frickin' smart, okay? Because what makes us strong is that which makes us wealthy. Money can build power for a nation. We have the largest economy in the world. The largest economy in the world. If you take the global GDP, which is mass output of the world, we're 25% of it. If you take the wealth of the world, we are 30% of it. If you take the population of the world, we're less than 5%. That's because we can bring our brains to a problem, we can bring our resources to the problem, and we can bring a stable society to the problem. And that can generate productivity. If you're excited about space and you want to be engaged in military, you need to join the Space Force. If you're excited about space and you don't want to join the military, I want you to join NASA, right? Because we have opportunities at NASA for people who, just like us, who don't want to work out. That's cool.
They still might want to work out.
They
work out in
might. They
space,
might not want to take a
actually.
test on it. That's all I'm saying. So.
So for so I'll wrap up with the last question with one that,
Senator Nelson's going to punch me in the face. Just saying.
yeah, exactly. We'll just, the workout in zero gravity. So I understand that my favorite question was already stolen this morning, Brett, with Jim Free of NASA, actually. So one of the things I'm asking and hearing about is, what is the best advice you've ever received in your career?
Okay.
And what advice do you wish you had received?
Okay. All right. Best advice.
Yeah.
Okay. When you take off your uniform, you want your family to be there. Okay? And guess what? Everybody takes off the uniform. Okay?
Yeah.
So prioritize appropriately. I constantly tell the people who work for me, because in the Space Force, we have people who were in the Army, who were in the Navy, who were in the Marine Corps, who were in the Air Force, and we all came together and created the Space Force. So on my staff, I have lots of Army folks, Navy folks, Marines, and I tell them, when we're not at war, don't act like we're at war. Go home. You can't run 100 miles an hour every day of your life and still have a real life. Work is part of who you are. It shouldn't be the only thing you are. That a lot of people, like, people like, oh, you got to work hard to get ahead. You got to be productive to get ahead. A lot of people, I'm going to share with you, a lot of people work long hours and spend the whole day talking to people. They don't get anything done. That's on them. Be productive. You're smart. You got a leg up. Next thing you need is grit and work ethic.
Simple.
Yeah. But uncommon.
Yeah, well, it goes kind of the earlier question about how do you let go when you go home?
Yeah.
And the answer is your people, your family, your community.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to figure out what your stress relief is. Mine's working out. Like, not in this heat, but, But yeah, that's a productive way to do
Yeah.
that. So like at your age in this town, you should be joining one of those run clubs that meet at like 5:30, finish up with beer. That's cool.
Okay, and what advice do you wish you had received that you know now?
Huh. Don't buy that first house.
Not bad, huh? Was it a fixer-upper?
2008.
Oh.
Thank you. It's like therapy.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you, Greg, for sharing your story, your service, and super fun and insightful. I learned a lot, too, about the role of Intel in the Space Force, and overall, just a reminder of what our values are collectively in this great country. I can see the flag flying out there, and it's Washington, D.C. is such a special place.
Yep.
Bringing all of our young professionals together here and sharing. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Can you do me a favor? Now, whoever has a phone that can actually take a good picture, okay? Take a picture of all of us kind of that way, but squeeze together so we can actually see the Capitol off on our side. And it's only going to take like 30 seconds because I got to leave, okay? It's like a mosh pit for a photo, okay?
All right.
Group photo.
Group photo
Thanks.
in the back.
All right, thank you again, sir. And Debra. Wonderful. I guess it was a stroll, not a fireside chat.